All right, so let's talk about, how you should study. Let's talk about flashcards. There are many people out there that, resist making flashcards. They say, I don't want to make flashcards. I like to understand the material. If you tell me that, if you tell me that you just want to understand the material, there's a great probability that certain tests you will not be able to pass. And that's the truth of it. Remember, I've been doing this for 13 years. I've seen, hundreds of students come through. So, sure, maybe, the foundations module, maybe you don't have to memorize the diagnosis. You do have to understand it, but you should memorize your tongue and pulse. You should memorize, pathways. With the acupuncture, any type of acupuncture exam, you have to memorize the points. It's not understanding the points. Because remember, they're not going to give you, 2 answers or, 4 answers that are completely different. You'll see 2 answers that maybe have 1 point difference. And it's really ultimately about memorizing the points. And I could have so many people come in and talk to you about memorizing. Now, when you memorize, you don't really want to memorize off a sheet of paper, okay? Because if there's a pink dot on that piece of paper, it could make it so you remember everything on that page. And that's not going to happen when you're taking the test. So the reality is a flashcard. A flashcard tells you, you either know it or you don't. You look at a tongue, and it says, a pale tongue, what is it? If you don't know what a pale tongue is, you can't answer the question, all right? But you have to know the information. It has to be memorized. Wind, cold. What are the points for wind, cold? If you can't tell me what it is, you don't know it well enough for your test. So it's the most important thing I will tell you is that you have to memorize. Now, I say that you need to have flashcards. It's the reality check, all right? Whether you know it or not. But there's a lot to do with how you make the flashcards. I myself, even when I started to make flashcards, I took all my primary pathways and put them on one 4x6. Do you think I learned anything? I learned nothing. So what you really need is just a little bit of information on each flashcard. Somebody told me one time the first rule of advertising is a lot of white space. You know that ad, I think it's got milk. Isn't that all it says? You've got a lot of whiteboard and it says got milk. I mean, does everybody see that? Or do they see the one that's all filled with pictures that say got milk? Which one's going to be more effective? Okay? So those, you want to think about that when you're doing a flashcard. You have one sentence on it and you turn it over. All right? So flashcards, they need to be easy to read. I always recommend, I've seen people use these little tiny pieces of paper. You really need to be looking at something like a 4x6. If you want to use 3x5s for maybe tongue and pulse, that's fine, but 4x6 is better. So 4x6 flashcards, why do we want to stuff the entire book on one flashcard? I have no idea, but you must resist, okay? Flashcards are simple. They're flashcards, meaning one sentence. That's it. You should be able to read them in a second, okay? And if you want to pass your test, you have to memorize, points, especially. It's one instance of things you have to memorize. I always joke around, tell me that you want to understand the information. If people tell me that, they say, you know what, I'm not going to memorize. For the California test, they'll say, I'm not going to memorize. I'm going to understand the material. I want to say, I'll see you next time, because I know that they're probably not going to pass. A standardized test of multiple choice questions have, two answers that are so close, and you have to have the material memorized. The information on these tests, the information that's given, the questions that are given to you on these tests come from your books, not from what you learned in your clinical experience. So it's like, oh, well, I was down the clinic and I don't really need to study points because I know it. And I say, oh, that's good. Okay, well, what's the first point that you would use for somebody that has blood deficiency? And they'll usually say to me, oh, spleen 10 or liver 8. And I'll say, wrong. If you're talking about, our textbooks that we're looking at, the first point that they will use for somebody that has blood deficiency is UB20. Okay, UB20. Why are we using UB20? It's the back shoe of the spleen. The spleen makes blood. So blood deficiency, you're looking at UB20. Then you're probably looking at UB17, influential point of blood. Many of us use spleen 10 and liver 8 because in our clinics, we're more apt to give a front treatment rather than a back treatment. So maybe our patients are more comfortable to be face up. Okay, so that's kind of an instance where I'm trying to teach you that, what you're learning in the clinic is not what they'll give you on the test. All right, they will give you information from the textbooks, which may not be the same information that you learned in the clinic, and you wouldn't want to. You're going to school to learn how to become, an acupuncturist, and it's very important to get, as much knowledge as you can from your clinic supervisors who have years of experience. Okay, but as far as taking the test, you have to take it from the books. Okay, so I have some samples here for you to look at. One of the first samples that I have is, a tongue and pulse card. And this tongue and pulse, if you can see, it says pale tongue. And that's all it says. This is a 3x5 card. I do sell flashcards. And if you look at the back of this flashcard, it has, deficiency of lung qi, deficiency of qi and blood. So that's it. You've got, one side says pale tongue. And the other side says deficiency of lung qi, deficiency of qi and blood. Bam, that's it. So remember, even with the purple tongues, where there's 4 different purple tongues, you're not going to put them all on one flashcard. Each one of those goes on a separate flashcard. Okay, remember, simple is better. Okay, the 10 asking song, you would do the same way. Has trouble falling asleep at night. That's one side of the flashcard. The other side of the flashcard, blood deficiency. Trouble falling asleep at night, blood deficiency. With like Zhang Fu cards, you're looking at a card and that might say, liver yang rising from liver blood deficiency. Okay, this one has a little bit more information. There's one card that'll have the syndrome tongue pulse points, but then I have another card that just the points, one line of points. So if you want to make the flashcards yourself, you're going to take the flashcards, you're going to put them on a 4x6. On one side, you might write something like liver yang rising from liver blood deficiency. On the other side of the flashcard, one line in the middle of the card, you can see it here, has just one line of points. That's it. That's how you're memorizing it. You do the same thing with CAM. CAM chapter 17 and 18. If you look at CAM chapter 17 and 18, we have a card here. The card says, wind cold, and one of my cards has all the syndrome, tongue and pulse and points. You don't have to make up cards like that if you don't want to. But then I have another card that says win cold, and it has all the points on it. And that's, you can see the card, it just has the points. Okay? If you were talking about, herbs, I have a card here that has Dong Gui on it. And then on the, so you should be able to look at that card and say, all right, what does Dong Gui do? These cards are on 4x6s. If you don't want to put taste, temperature, and channels on it, you don't have to. You should at least learn the functions. So you're looking at the other side of the flashcard, and the other side of the flashcard, has taste, temperature, and channels if you want, but it has a separate line. You see the spacing for each function, and down the bottom of the page has the contraindication or caution. So it's separated out so you can see a space in between each function. Okay, so it's easy to look at. If you were talking about formulas, my formula cards have 4 different cards. We have one card, let's say it has Guizhitong, and it has the entire syndrome, symptoms, diagnosis, tongue and pulse. Then I have another card that just says Guizhitong, and on the other side, you just have a tongue and pulse. Or you have Guizhitong on one side with the ingredients on the other side. Then you have one more card that has Guizhitong with indications, king herb. So we have 4 different cards for each formula. Now maybe you don't want to make this many. You should at least make the indication and the tongue and pulse. It's a lot of work, but it's worth it. Okay, so that's kind of a general idea on how you should make flashcards. Okay, because flashcards are important. If you don't do them right, you can't memorize the information.